Atlanta Falcons, Minnesota Vikings, Sunday Night Football. Everything you need to know for your fantasy teams and your player projections in 15 minutes. If you've never been here before, welcome. My name is Max. I make these breakdowns for every single primetime game, looking at coverage data, run scheme metrics, and overall statistical trends to give you an edge by leading into the schematics behind the numbers instead of just the figures and numbers themselves. Let's get into this, but before we do, I want to make sure you guys know all of my picks for these games are on my socials. There's a link in the description for them, but on Twitter, that's where the more long shot fun picks come in. Instagram, TikTok, the more data-based entries, if you will, but make sure you're locked in on all of them. Let's talk about this game, though. The Minnesota Vikings defense, who put on a pretty solid showing against the Chicago Bears, really after the first drive against the Chicago Bears last week, were really, really good. Gave up 35 pass attempts to them, 58 quarterback rushing yards for Caleb Williams as well as 14 wide receiver receptions, 144 yards, and a touchdown. It's worth noting that Brian Flores, and we talked about this last week in our Monday Night Football breakdown, which make sure you subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss this week's 2 Monday Night Football breakdowns. He played middle field open on 67.4% of snaps last week, so 2 of every 3 snaps, 2 high safeties, middle field open, a lot of quarters, a lot of cover 2. And last week, that Falcons offense saw above average middle field open as well. When Tampa played it was a lot more cover 4. With Flores, it's going to be more zone. He runs the 6th most zone in the NFL, but ultimately not a ton of cover 1, like true cover 1 man with a safety up top. Some cover 3 when he gets to the middle field close stuff, but a lot of cover 4, cover 6 even, and a lot of cover 2. So what's important to note there is Drake London, just in general against zone, is the guy. We'll talk injury report a little bit later on in the video, but target rates matter. So the Minnesota Vikings gave up the 25th highest, so the 8th lowest target rate to the outside last week, while Michael Penix Jr. threw to the outside at the 5th highest rate. Now, what's interesting here is the slot production matches up very, very nicely, where the Minnesota Vikings gave up the 6th highest target rate there last week, and Michael Penix Jr. threw at the 15th highest rate there. In terms of routes run from the slot, it was Ray McLeod, Kyle Pitts, Washington, and Drake London. What's interesting now, though, is Darnell Mooney potentially will play. How does that impact this offense? If you were subscribed last year or followed last year, you'd know Darnell Mooney coming to the offense doesn't necessarily mean he runs more slot routes. It actually means Drake London also runs more slot routes because they like Mooney on the outside sometimes. In terms of targets per route run, like who is getting targeted in the slot when they're actually running routes, Bijan Robinson, oddly enough, we'll talk about his projections here at the end, led the Falcons in targets per route run from the slot. Again, it's an efficiency number. It's an average number, so it's not like he's getting 10 targets. He just was targeted when he was in the slot at a higher rate than everybody else. Drake London was 2, Kyle Pitts was 3, Ray McLeod was 4. So I'm looking at slot production. Again, we'll talk about the exact numbers and picks a little bit later on. And thinking like Michael Penix Jr., probably number 1, going to have to get the ball out quick. Number 2, going to keep it between the hashes when he does. And number 3, just going to look for safety valves, safety blankets against this really, really confusing Brian Flores defense. In terms of inline target rate, Kyle Pitts more of a true slot guy anyways, but doesn't match up there. The Vikings getting targeted at the inline spot, 27th highest rate. Falcons only throwing it there the 20th highest rate. And then the Vikings did give up a lot of checkdowns, but Michael Penix Jr. didn't throw to running backs a ton last week. This is very interesting to note because you see this 30 number right here, right? That means Michael Penix Jr. throwing to the running back position at the 3rd lowest rate in the NFL. I'll talk picks at the end. It is extremely important to note that that number was very, very low as it related to his overall efficiency, but it wasn't low as it related to Bijan Robinson's receiving production outside of that 50-yard touchdown too. I'm not just talking about the long touchdown. In terms of run scheme metrics, the Falcons didn't run the ball wildly efficiently last week. Now, the football mind in me says they're going to try to do that better this week. Like they're almost going to go out of their way to do it. That's a tough defense to do it against. But I will say, I'll flip over to the injury report very, very quickly. The Minnesota Vikings are probably going to be without Andrew Van Ginkel. Again, we don't know right now, but a concussion, 2 DNPs, it doesn't look good. That's a pretty important run defender they could be down. Now, Harrison Smith didn't play last week, probably will be back, so that will help. At the same time, I mean, it's a tough loss for a defense, to lose a guy like Andrew Van Ginkel. On the other side, just while we're here, a couple DNPs here. The most important ones, in my opinion, for this game, though, Mooney and Drake London sounds like will play, but Mooney is somebody we have to look at. because he'll have slot production. He'll slide Drake London inside a little bit more. That's a pretty big deciding factor in the overall projections and numbers for this game, I think. If Mooney plays, I like London a little bit more. As weird as that sounds, it was a trend I noticed last year. I like London a little bit more in terms of other DNPs here, though. Jack Nelson DNP, Casey Washington DNP. Like, it's important to note that, especially because, like I just talked about in the breakdowns, you go, look, Casey Washington had the third most routes run from the slot. So if he's out, somebody, de facto, by default, has to step in. Again, people just automatically think it's Mooney. It's not. Drake London could be that guy as well. So I'm looking at Drake London, and I like it. Let's talk run scheme metrics very briefly, getting back to where we were just talking about. The Minnesota Vikings run defense is really good. That defensive line is really good. I mean, they looked incredible against the Bears, especially in the second half. Really, after that first drive, they just looked good. But the Falcons, to me, are going to get back to the run game. They are. Are they going to be efficient in doing it? I'm not convinced. But I think this is going to be a close game, and they won't have to abandon the run. And I think they're going to commit to it. Now, in terms of the comparative projections on this side, again, Drake London receptions is something that, like, yeah, I like it. I might, toss it somewhere. Again, all this is not financial or professional advice. This is what I am personally doing. Tail at your own risk. But this is for entertainment purposes only. Michael Penix Jr., the attempt and completion number, very, very interesting to me. So his yards right now is around 225. Caleb had 210 last week. Again, I trust the Falcons pass offense more than I trust Falcons pass offense more than I trust the Bears pass offense. What's really interesting to me, though, is like Penix completed a ton of balls last week, or threw a ton of passes last week. I think that 32.5 number is a little too low. Like, I really do. I think, especially in a game, like I said, where the Falcons may commit to the run but won't be wildly efficient in it, they're going to have to throw on second and medium, second and long, especially on third downs. Screen game is going to be very important to me, and the Falcons are very good at that. I just think the ball is going to get out quick, and I don't mind the completion number, but I'd rather bank on a quarterback just throwing more than completing more against Brian Flores. But here's what I really want to talk about, the Bijan stuff. So you guys saw the 30th highest or third lowest target rate out of the backfield last week, right? That was a fact in terms of how it related to where Michael Penix threw the football. He threw it there as it relates to his overall attempts at the third lowest rate. When he did that, Bijan Robinson still had 6 catches. 6 catches. And now he's going up against the Vikings defense that got targeted out of the backfield at the 6th highest rate. I think that 3.5 number is a little too low. Like, I like Bijan there because everything last week, the numbers said he shouldn't have a good receiving game, and he did. Now he's getting a defense that's going to allow you to lean into that even more. I like Bijan a little bit more. Let's talk Falcons defense. So the two big things I noticed last week with the Falcons defense, sorry, this multiple wide receiver touchdowns. Oh, no, this is good. Was the quarterback rushing yards. So Baker having a more explosive game on the ground than we probably expected, as well as multiple wide receiver touchdowns. Emeka Ibuka, really. But to me, this is just a better matchup for Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, the outside pass catchers. So the Falcons defense ran the 9th most zone, which is not inherently different to what the Minnesota Vikings saw last week out of Dennis Allen. Dennis Allen runs a ton of zone, but it was all middle field open, cover 2, cover 4. The Falcons are middle field closed. So they run the 5th most middle field closed, the 2nd most cover 3, which is, again, 3 deep safeties, 4 underneath, 4 rushing. And the Bears really didn't do that last week. Like, the Vikings did not see that last week. They're also just middle of the pack in true cover 1 man. So there will be situations where they just man up across the board, which leans into 2 things we'll talk about at the end. But there will be situations they do that where the Bears didn't really. And honestly, when the Bears did, they got flamed. They got torched by Justin Jefferson, not distributing routes on Aaron Jones' touchdown. That was also man-to-man. Kevin O'Connell hunts man-to-man. Like, that's what he does, and it's very easy to do when you have Justin Jefferson on your team, obviously, but a technician in Adam Thielen, a guy like Aaron Jones, who I think is a very good receiving back. It's very easy to do, and you got a good football mind doing it. But I think he'll still see some of that man, whereas last week, They didn't really. And when they did, the Vikings crushed them. So let's talk target rates because that is important, as the Falcons, again, allowed the second highest out wide target rate. It makes sense with the zone that they play. On the other side, the Vikings didn't really get to throw the ball outside last week because the Bears were sitting in a lot of cover too. They were sitting back, clouding these wide receivers like Justin Jefferson on the outside, and essentially making JJ McCarthy get off his first read, check the ball down, and occasionally just scramble. So that is what the Vikings saw last week. I think they will see some more of that this week. Like, I don't think walking out of this week, the Falcons are still going to be top 5 in middle field close coverages, because I think they're going to see some things that worked on Chicago's end, especially in that first half. But I mean, they allowed so many targets out wide because the one-on-one opportunities were there in man, but also in their cover 3 match stuff, where if you get a receiver running vertical on the outside, a Justin Jefferson one-on-one with AJ Terrell, whose job is depth and divider, like the deep third, unless it's a vertical route past, say, 5 yards, it's de facto one-on-one man out there. That's the reality of it. In terms of slot stuff, nothing really out of him. Makes a lot of sense. Inline stuff, McCarthy threw there at the second highest rate in the league. Now, I find it hard to lean into TJ Hawkinson. Now, again, I will go to the injury report. What's interesting here is a guy like Josh Oliver, ankle injury, 2 DNPs. Like, that's very interesting to note if you're looking at TJ Hawkinson's projections. But, like, I find it so hard to believe or so hard to confidently lean into TJ Hawkinson. The only thing in terms of coverage target rates that match up are backfield targets. But, I mean, do you really want to lean into a split backfield in terms of receiving? Like, Aaron Jones obviously had a better receiving game last week, but Jordan Mason, did he? I don't know if he had more touches, but it was very comparable. Like, that's a true split backfield right now. I don't know if I can lean into that, especially as it relates to receiving production. To me, it's the outside receivers and something else with JJ McCarthy, which we'll talk at the end. But we do want to talk run scheme metrics very briefly, because it is important to note that the Bears defense was solid last week against the run. The Falcons defense was good, but the overall yards per carry, it's like it's average, and there's some good match numbers there. But again, do you want to lean into a split backfield in any sense? Probably not. Probably not. So again, with these early season games, I tend to stay away from the run scheme metrics because game flow has a lot to do with it. How well an offensive line is blocking, how healthy an offensive line is blocking as well. Because you remember the Vikings last week didn't have Darisaw. Like, stay away in terms of the run game and the running backs in general. But 2 things I do really like here. Justin Jefferson, he had 44 yards last week in a very non-favorable matchup. Very, very non-favorable matchup. Now, more outside one-on-ones in terms of cover 3 match and man-to-man. He's going to see more true man-to-man across the board. Literally didn't see any almost last week. When he did, again, he won. He scored a touchdown. 44 yards in a non-favorable matchup, that's a pretty high floor as it relates to his current projections, I feel like. Like, I like Justin Jefferson a lot, and I just think now, becoming more comfortable in the offense, maybe he'll see some double teams, so be it. But you can't really double team on a cover 3 match, which is what the Falcons did at the 5th highest rate in the league. Second highest rate in the NFL. Now, JJ McCarthy rushing yards is another very interesting one. Obviously, the Falcons allowed 39 to Baker last week. And again, a non-favorable quarterback rushing matchup. The teams that tend to play a little more man are more favorable for quarterback rushing yards. Multiple explosive runs for more than 10 yards. He's going to get involved in the option game. I don't mind JJ McCarthy if you're putting 10-ish yards in an entry or 15 yards in an entry. A straight number, what was it, 17, 18, around there. It's a little scary, but I don't mind those. Like that, those are 4 good spots. These 2, again, I like London, but Bijan and Penix for combination of entries. And I don't mind that. I think this is going to be a close game, but I appreciate you guys watching. I appreciate you listening. If you're new, make sure you subscribe. I will see you guys for the Monday Night Football breakdowns. 2 games, Raiders, Chargers, Texans, Bucks. See you next time. God bless.